in that situation, are you ever nervous that you might not have the right amount of footage? Did you ever have to go back and ask for some pickups?
No, because Guillermo comes in every day and works with you. Sometimes he comes in before you even cut the scene and you start cutting it together. He would come in every day, almost every day before shooting, because a lot of it was shot on the set and I was cutting at the studio. So he would come in the morning and spend maybe an hour with me. And we'd look at the stuff and I might start cutting the scene. We might actually get through it and then I'd work on it more. So he had the opportunity immediately to see if he needed stuff. And then he would often come in he'd spend his whole lunch hour in the cutting room with me. So we were really doing his cut virtually at the same time as I was doing my cut. I mean, there was no my cut per se. I was, literally a director's cut on every scene on a daily basis.
Oh, wow. So what would you say is there a particular scene that you are particularly proud of in the film?
Yeah, there is actually. I don't know, well, the movie where the Sally Hawkins character is with Richard Jenkins, and she's saying that she's gonna, help the creature escape and wants him to help her, and he tells her not to do it. And it's a scene, it's basically a dialogue scene, but of course she speaks only sign language, and he's telling her you can't do it, and I just thought it was wonderfully shot, wonderfully performed, and it was exciting to put together because the material was so great and so moving.
Yeah. Sorry, we're getting a bit of mic issue on your end. I'm not sure.
Really?
Yeah, it's sort of distorted.
Let me plug myself.
Yeah. All right, let's try that.
Let's see if that sounds better. I don't know why. I haven't really touched anything or done it. But I do have a relatively old MacBook Air, so, and obviously I'm still plugging my headphone in, which is really,
sorry, speak again?
How do I sound now?
Sound great. So sorry, what were you saying that particular scene was?
Oh, should I start again? Was that really that bad? Okay, it's the scene where Sally Hawkins' character tries to persuade the Richard Jenkins character to help her help the creature escape.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in his apartment. And she's following him around and he's resisting. He's saying, you're crazy, you can't do it. He's just an animal. And it ends with, her saying something like, we're all animals if we don't help, or something like that. I don't care. It's wonderfully performed. Sally Hawkins, of course, is only doing sign language, which is amazing. But she communicates so much. She's such a wonderful actress. And as is Richard Jenkins, a wonderful actor. So I really love that scene.
So it sounds like you're really focused, like you really appreciate, the script when you're working on it, or storytelling. So what is it you looked for in a script when you get a project?
I make sure I have the deal. Sitting in that cutting, that I'll be sitting in that editor's chair, when they start shooting. What do I look for? Look, it's great to find a script that you love. That's but to be quite honest, it's hard to get these jobs. And there have been jobs where I get a script and maybe I don't love it.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's a challenge. And often I'm surprised that things that I didn't think would really, were my cup of tea ended up being pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I look for strong characters, for one, that are interesting, credible situations that stories that I actually can believe in.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly moving scenes that really are well written, that the characters in conflict and they're interesting scenes, interesting stories, and an emotional drive to the material.
Well, speaking of really good characters, you worked on Sopranos.
Yeah,
So
well, that comes to mind. All those scripts, every time you got a new script, you'd read it, and I would be laughing and saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe that they came up with this or that." I know there's a one scene, I can't remember even the name of the script, but Michael Imperioli, I guess his name was. God, I can't even remember the character's names anymore. Anyways, sits on his girlfriend's a little dog and kills the dog because he's high on heroin. And I thought, and that's the very first beat in the scene. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is fabulous. It's like Chien Andalou, where they, begins with a slicing the eyeball of a donkey. It's so, it just grabs you so much. It's just so horrifying and yet, in this case, so kind of absurd and funny. So those were wonderful scripts, and they were some amazing scenes on unbelievably frequently.
yeah. Now something like a television show, you're cutting an hour-long episode, but you don't have the same amount of time as you would if you were cutting a feature. So for something like The Sopranos or one of those shows, how do you maintain the quality in such a shorter production schedule or shorter?
Well, that's a good question. The Sopranos was unusual in that sense. After it became the first season, the shooting schedules were relatively short. They were like 9 days, and but as it became successful, the shooting schedules became longer. And in all the seasons, although the directors had their 4 days, which is what the Directors Guild mandates, David Chase would take literally months to finish his cut. And he was really the only other person who was involved in the editing. If HBO gave notes, they gave it to him, and I wasn't aware of them. So there was no network cut, or there was no writer-producer. Well, he was the writer-producer. So we had the luxury of spending a long time working on those shows and going through many sets of notes and doing many changes. And sometimes he would write a new scene or pick up shots or do whatever he thought was needed. On other shows, I don't know, you do the best you can. Obviously, depending, the classic thing is a relatively short shoot. You work with the director, usually 4 days, which is what the Directors Guild mandate, the kind of contractually they get. And then you do a producer's cut, maybe a couple of producers are involved, depending. And then you get a network cut and you do their notes, and that's about it. So what you hope that you get pretty close on your cut, and then you get to do the director's cut and refine it and try to add, whatever contribution you can. One situation was different on House of Cards. There was no, really, the directors were given, David Fincher gave the directors, at least the first season, that was the one I worked on, kind of carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. So I would work for much longer than 4 days, maybe weeks with a director on the shows that I was doing with him. And then we would give them to David Fincher and he would give notes. And that would take a long time. There was no, I think when we started, I don't think there was even any date when it was going to air. Of course, it was the first one of those shows where they dropped the whole series. It was, I think, Netflix first big show. So that was another really interesting, kind of a gratifying situation to work closely with the directors for as long as they wanted.
Wow. Now we've got a question here from Germany from a guy named Boev. And he's wondering, he says, I'm watching from Germany. I have a question. How close was or is the communication that with your sound team, so the sound editor and designer, for example, on Shape of Water or Sopranos and House of Cards?
On Shape of Water, Guillermo really guided the sound, essentially. I mean, I obviously we did attempt score, or rather, attempt score and track, but ultimately Guillermo worked directly and frequently with the sound editors and the sound designers. So I didn't really, I was probably in spotting sessions. I might have occasionally pointed something out or made a note, but it was Guillermo's thing. The Sopranos, television is weird, as an editor, this stuff better than anybody, but you have a spotting session with the sound team. They go and do whatever they want. The associate producer runs the dub. The editor is usually brought in for a playback where you give a set of notes, and that's pretty much it. So it's not a lot of participation in television. And of course, it really depends on something like David Chase's film, Not Fade Away. I was much more involved in speaking to the sound guys and working with them, because that wasn't David's thing, really. And much more involved with the dubbing stuff. Although on Shape of Water as well, I kind of ran the dub. And then Guillermo would come in and they'd do a playback for him, and then they would do his notes. So that was my involvement with the sound.
You do, when you create your sound design, some editors I've talked to, they sort of, like when they're editing, they ask their assistant to grab the sounds and drop them in, and some editors prefer to do it themselves. How do you like to approach it?
I hope my assistant has the skills to give me a soundtrack, frankly. I can do it myself. I have done it. I think the advantage to having your assistant do it, apart from obviously saving you a lot of time and letting you just focus on the cutting, because especially in a television show, you have all this film flooding in, you have to get it cut by a certain date, a hard and fast date. The last thing you want to do is take time to cut sound or music. And the other advantage it gives you is your assistant, just the way you present something to a director, and he can say, I like this, I don't like this, let's try something else. I'm in a better position to hear a well-constructed soundtrack and say, hey, let's try this over here, or I always imagine this particular spot would sound different, or you can work on the kind of more conceptual sounds, that involve slowing things down or speeding them up, or, so that's how I prefer to, I don't have a problem delegating it, and I prefer to do it that way.
Interesting. So I want to jump back, because you mentioned you worked on House of Cards in the first season, which was the first one that dropped all at once.
Right.
What was that experience like? Because no one had really done that at that point. So how did it affect you in the post process?
Didn't affect me at all, really. Yeah, it was just like cutting any other television show. It's just, there was no air date, and I sure didn't think much about it in terms of, this is a big deal or a big change. For me, my focus is always just cutting the film, getting the episodes working, making sure the director's happy and the producer's happy and that I'm happy ultimately, and just getting the work done. I mean, how it's presented, when it's presented, all that stuff is, I haven't thought a lot of, I didn't think a lot about it. It was one of those things where afterwards, when it was such, a kind of phenomenon, it was like, wow, that's quite something.
No, because the reason I asked that is, I talked to Paul Day, who's worked on a few Netflix projects, and what his team has done in the past is almost treat it like when they get to a certain point, if they have the time, they'll watch them back to back to back, almost like a movie. So they'll take a day and watch all the episodes to see where, parts that need to be fixed in episode 1 so that it pays off better in episode 5. Was there anything like that, or how did you guys work to figure that out?
There really wasn't. It was, when I say it was like a regular television show, it's like on The Sopranos, we had 3 editors, each of us did our show, shows, and that was it. It was up to the producers and the writers to supply that. House of Cards, they cross-boarded shows. So I would cut 2 shows at once with the same director, and then we'd cut those. We'd make sure those were consistent. But as far as I know for a fact, we never looked at, the whole series end to end or did that.
Now, Jeremy Weinstein from Hollywood, actually, he's asking, how do you balance doing your editor's cut that you're happy with against a tight network schedule?
I'm not quite sure. My editor's cut I have to do in the time they give me. If they want to cut 2 days after they finish shooting, I have to do that. So the schedules are sometimes kind of brutal.
Oh, you're breaking up a bit
do
here.
the best you can. Right? You're kind of frozen.
Yeah. Are you there?
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry, it broke up a bit.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal is.
But it sounds you like you were saying, if it's got to be done, it's got to be done.
Yeah.
So how do you balance? Because it's one of those weird things where, I was talking to someone a few weeks ago, and they were saying the film industry is a weird thing where there's multiple artists that have to work together.
Right.
And the problem is that all the artists want to do it their way. And so in a situation where you're working with a director, how do you approach making sure that you're heard as an editor and creating something that you're happy with, but also making sure that the director's happy with because it's their project or the producer's project?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I'm not there to, it's not my vision. It's not my film. I'm there to make sure that the people who created this are happy with the product. So when I do my cut, I try to make it as good as possible, using my own gut as to what's working and what isn't working. I have to, because that's the only weather vane I have. When I work with the director, I try to do his notes, whatever he, usually, you never get it all right. Rarely does the director say, oh, gee, just ship it. Because they have their own ideas. And that's, so they'll say, look, I was looking for this or that, or I did this specific shot. So you do all those things. And if there's a point at which you feel like you're doing, it's not the optimal way of doing it, or there might be another way. Well, if there's another way, you can say, hey, look, let me do it this way and I'll show it to you. But ultimately, what I found is you can raise an objection or make a suggestion once. If it's not received, then you move on. Because it's you're trying to do when you're doing the director's cut, you are doing the director's cut, not your cut. If obviously you want to make contributions, obviously they're not putting the pieces of film together. So you're listening to what they want and trying to change things so it conforms to what their vision was. But I have no investment in, you can't use a close up here. It makes no sense. It's a terrible shot, whatever. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's his or her decision as to what we do. And I will certainly make a suggestion. I'll say, I think it'd be better like this, or I don't think this piece works, or whatever. And often you'll say, okay, let's look at it. Oh, you're right. Or else you'll say, no, I understand you feel that way, but let's do it my way. Quite literally, sometimes you'll get that statement. And you move on. You can't, that's your job. And it's the same with all, you say the artists are working together, but really they don't work together. I mean, in a way, they're all working under the umbrella of a director or a producer, whoever is the governing creative force in the project.
Yeah, you're part of a team. You have to work.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Now, in a situation like, because a lot of times, whenever I've been working on a project, they'll be like, okay, can you try this? And you're like, I don't know if that'll work. And then you're pleasantly surprised that it's something really interesting. Has there been anything in your career that I don't know if that'll work? And then you're like, wow, that's actually really fascinating or worked really well?
Yes, yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I found that to be the case. Yeah.
So I guess I do want to jump to Man in the High Castle.
And also, if I go back to the other thing,
Yeah.
sometimes I really haven't expressed my, negative feelings about something because I was so appalled. I would say, yeah, sure, let's do that. And then I do it and I go, oh my God, that really works. I never thought that'd work.
Now, in terms of Man in the High Castle, had you read the original book before getting into the project?
No, I came onto that show. They were replacing an editor, so they needed a new editor. And I didn't take over his shows, but I just, it was out of the blue. I'd never even heard of the book. And no, I had not. I hadn't read anything. I don't think I even read the scripts prior to the ones. I think I looked at the shows. I mean, I think I started on the third or fourth show. I can't even remember. I watched the previous shows to figure out what was going on in the series.
Now, you mentioned you were taking over for an editor. So coming into a series that's already established,
Yeah.
how do you approach making sure that you're on the same page as the other editors and what the producers want?
Well, first of all, it was the first season, so it wasn't really
Yeah.
established. I think they were finding their way. And I mean, this is a question I sort of get a version of a lot, but I always feel like I look at the episode I'm cutting and what the episode is about and what the beats are, and I try to make that episode work. There's really nothing as an editor you can do. I mean, ultimately, yeah, you could imagine maybe you should stay longer on this character in this scene because in show, you're in show 4 and in show 8, he does such and such. But that's not really, I mean, ideally, I guess, if I had all the knowledge in the world, I'd be able to do that. But that's hopefully what the producers and writers are going to help you with. I just want to make the episode work as a self-contained piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of my focus, whether I obviously, if I start in advance, I read the episode multiple times so I really understand it. If I'm doing a feature, I do the same thing. If it's based on a real person or a novel, I'll read the novel or whatever, because I want to have as much information as possible.
Okay. Now you want to make the best show, as you were saying. So is there a show, you've worked on so many great television shows, so is there a particular episode from your career that you're proud of and you're just loved?
Well, The Sopranos, there were so many of those. I mean, I did all, what is it, about 7 seasons. I don't know, there was one in the first season called College, which you probably remember, where Tony Soprano takes his daughter to look at colleges and then meets a mob informant who he ends up killing. I love that episode. And there was one episode, I think it was called Whitecaps, where Carmela kicks Tony out of the house, and there's some amazing scenes, basically arguments between Carmela and Tony Soprano.
What was it about these episodes? Was it particularly the story or particularly?
It's really always the story and the performances that were so, some of these performances were so amazing. You'd get this film and it's like the scene I described in Shape of Water. I mean, you just, you see these things and it's like these actors are so amazing. I mean, Edie Falco and James Gandolfini were just such amazing actors.
Yeah.
I mean, the last scene in The Sopranos, the famous cut to black, that was a fun scene to do, challenging. And
well, and it ended up being a controversial one, cutting to black initially.
Well, it got a lot of notice because people thought their cable service had gone out or their TiVo had broken or something. Which is what my assistant always joked about when we were cutting. He'd say, "Oh," Yeah, I thought it was great. I mean, I thought it was a great ending to the series. It didn't, it kind of sidestepped, whatever other ending would have happened where people would have said, well, that makes sense or that doesn't make sense or whatever. It was sort of a meta thing. Like it would have left everybody wondering, well, what the hell does that mean? And
Now, I have one last question that I like to ask everyone I interview.
sure.
So I've actually already asked you this question because we did an interview a couple of years ago, but that is, what's your favorite guilty pleasure film to watch?
Guilty pleasure. I don't. What did I say last time? I can't remember.
I can't remember. Well, the other thing we could do is, because COVID's sort of got everyone staying at home.
Yeah.
Is there a particular show that you would recommend people check out that you've seen over the pandemic?
Gosh, I wish I could remember something. Whatever. Oh yeah, there's a thing on Hulu called Ordinary People, which was an amazing series. I thought it was just amazing. There's a show on Netflix called Dairy Girls, which is very funny. A comedy from Ireland. I guess both of these are from Ireland.
Wow.
What other things? I think we talked about this before. I mean, I see these things. It's sort of like fast food. You kind of forget. I can't even remember the names of them afterwards.
And there's so much stuff now.
Yeah,
it's just crazy.
Yeah, there was an Indian series called Delhi Crime or something, and it's based on a real story. Actually, this was in the news recently, where this young woman was raped on a bus, and I think the men were actually hung recently. But it's a Canadian director, Indian woman. I forgot her name. It was pretty darn good. I remember that one. Those are the ones that come to mind. I mean, I watched. Strangely enough, I watched Platoon recently, which I hadn't seen in years, and I was amazed at how good that is. How what a good film that is.
Now, before I say goodbye, David Young says he's a former assistant of yours from way back, and he wants to say hi. That's watching.
Great. What did I remember his name, and I can't quite remember him.
Okay.
What did we work on?
We'll wait for him to answer that.
Okay.
Let's see. Is there a project that you're looking forward to in the future?
Well, I'm going to hopefully, unless they shut LA down again, I'm going to start on the morning show in the beginning of October.
Oh, fantastic.
That's my current project.
Yeah, which will be exciting. Do you know if Mimi's directing that again?
Mimi is on it, and I believe I'm cutting the first two shows, and I believe she's directing those two shows.
David says back in Chicago.
Back in Chicago. What? I was never in Chicago. David Young. Well, maybe he worked on a show that was shot in Chicago.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, say hello. Hello, David. Hi. Nice to hear from you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And,
you're welcome. It was fun.
Make sure to have a good weekend.
Same to you.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.